Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Thank you. There you are. My name is Alan Madden, Gadigal Elder. For my first song, nah. Married man, 10 children, 26 grandchildren and 17 great-great. Yes, we did have TV. Just couldn't afford the bloody electricity. Born and bred in Redfern, the capital of Sydney. Welcome to country to me is always an honour and a pleasure. Just to give you a little bit of an insight of where you are and who we are. As with all welcomes, firstly, I'd like to acknowledge our First Nations and traditional owners of the lands that you may have come from or work upon, and pay my respects. To all our Aboriginal elders, all elders, past and present, also pay my respects. To all our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander brothers and sisters, from whatever Aboriginal or island nation you may have come from, welcome to Gadigal. And to all our non-Indigenous brothers and sisters here today, a very warm and sincere welcome to you to Gadigal. No matter where you've come from, be across the seas, across the state or across town, once again, a very warm and sincere welcome to you to Gadigal. And as I've mentioned many times before, was, is, and always will be Aboriginal land. Only three things shorter than that: coming, taxation and going. It's an honour and pleasure to be here today to welcome one and all to Gadigal. Gadigal is one of 29 clans of the Eora Nation. The Eora Nation is bounded by nature's own, the Hawkesbury River to the north, the Nepean to the west, and Georges River to the south. And in between those three mighty rivers is the Eora Nation. And in that nation, there are 29 clans. And the clan's land we're on today is Gadigal. On behalf of Kumari and of the Gadigal mob, once again, a very warm and sincere welcome to you to Gadigal. There's an old Aboriginal saying out there, and I think it's very appropriate for you mob here today. They say, where there's a will, there's relatives. So once again, on behalf of Kumari and of the Gadigal mob, welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Uncle Alan, for the very generous welcome to Gadigal country. And thank you all for being here. I'm the CEO of the Public Interest Advocacy Centre, and we're delighted to have you here with us today. Bujari Gamarua, Gamarada, hello and welcome, friends. And can I also say thank you? I think we're also streaming online, so thanks to the people who are joining us on the screens. In May 2017, at Uluru, having gathered from all points of the southern sky, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander delegates of the National Constitutional Convention issued their statement from the heart. And for us at PIAC, their call for voice, treaty and truth rang true and clear. The generous and compelling invitation to walk with First Nations people in a movement of the Australian people for a better future was one that we were eager to accept. Some of you were with us, I think, for Professor Davis's address to our 2018 Social Justice Dinner. Now, a room full of lawyers after a few wines is almost impossible to shut up. But as Megan spoke, the room stilled. And when the statement itself was unveiled and read aloud, the room fell silent. It was, as I think it was Ralph Pliner said to me afterwards, like being in the presence of the Magna Carta. And throughout that year of 2018, at PIAC, we thought deeply about what we could do to support the vision of the Uluru Statement. And we started discussions with the Indigenous Law Centre about how we could work together to advance the truth-telling about our history that delegates had called for. And today, we are delighted to share with you the first harvest of that partnership, the project that we've called Towards Truth. You'll hear shortly from Scientia Professor Megan Davis. Professor Davis is a cobble woman and the Balnaves Chair in Constitutional Law, Pro-Vice Chancellor, Society and Director of the Indigenous Law Centre at UNSW. She's a globally recognised expert in the rights of Indigenous peoples and one of the architects of the Uluru Statement. Megan will talk about the importance of truth-telling for First Nations people and how Towards Truth responds to the Uluru Statement from the heart. Corey Smith is a Ngemba man and the project coordinator for Towards Truth, and Corey will provide a demonstration of the Towards Truth website. We'll then invite Kishaya Delaney to join us for a panel discussion. Kishaya is a proud Wiradjuri woman and a solicitor in the pro bono team here at Herbert Smith Freehills. Kishaya is an active member of the Uluru Statement Youth Dialogue Towards Truth team at PIAC from 2020 to 2021. Before we hear from our speakers, just let me note we have a photographer and film crew here to capture this special event. If you prefer not to be filmed or photographed, please speak to a PIAC staff member. So will you now please welcome Professor Megan Davis.
Thank you. Thanks, Jonathan. I was just asked to say a few words about truth-telling and what it means to First Nations people, and then about this project a bit. I should apologise from the outset. I've got a wisdom tooth coming through and I haven't had my wisdom teeth surgery yet, so I do sound a bit odd, meaning I can't really enunciate my words properly, but I will try. The Uluru Statement from the Heart proposed a sequence of reforms that's become known as Voice Treaty Truth. Prior to the Uluru Dialogues, there have been occasional calls over the years for truth commissions, but it hasn't been a really prominent part of the Aboriginal discourse of rights or of the struggle. So the Council for Aboriginal Reconciliation is regarded as the truth and reconciliation process, and so is the kind of reconciliation process that followed the Council for Aboriginal Reconciliation. But I suppose the problem with the past 20 years of reconciliation is that truth hasn't been a part of that reconciliation framework. In fact, it is the problem of the way in which reconciliation is viewed and has been considered in Australia in relation to First Nations people. And one of the significant things of the Uluru Statement from the Heart is that Uluru brought back rights and the pursuit of justice to this notion of reconciliation, where Reconciliation Australia, through the reconciliation action plans, had eliminated those elements from reconciliation which government doesn't feel comfortable with. So reconciliation is a process that's renowned around the world, the Australian reconciliation process, as one that requires nothing of the state. It only requires private action, action of corporations, not-for-profits, NGOs, unis, sporting clubs, and it requires private action of people who work within those organisations. But it asks nothing of the state. It asks nothing of the state, which means when the time comes for serious conversations about rights and constitutional change, Australians aren't equipped with that information that's required for them to understand why structural reform is so necessary. And that is the importance of Uluru. It brought rights back to the table. When we had the Uluru Dialogues, truth was not regarded as something that would be a model or an option for constitutional recognition, because it's something that's not done through the Constitution. But it came up at all the dialogues. But it didn't come up in the sense that, in the way that people talk about it post-Uluru, because after Uluru, we had all the transitional justice theorists and academics and experts and all the people who want truth commissions come over the top and make an assumption that what people were asking for in the dialogues was a truth commission. but nothing could be further from the truth. The discussions, and I mean, I think that also speaks, it's not just pardon the pun, but it speaks to the reason why we need a voice. Because after Uluru, we said to people, that is not what people asked for, a truth commission, you know, to haul in all the descendants of people who have done, you know, grave wrongs and interrogate them. That is not what people asked for. But people don't listen to the Aboriginal voice. They don't listen to the First Nations voice. And so now we have this proliferation of truth commissions popping up all over the nation, when we know from all of, virtually all, I know some will quarrel with this, truth and reconciliation commission examples around the world, particularly in relation to Indigenous peoples, most people are profoundly disappointed with how they were run and the outcomes of those commissions. What our people did say was, truth-telling happens every day in our communities. They didn't use the language of truth so much as the language of Aboriginal history, Australian history. They would say there's not enough Australian history in the primary school curriculum. There's not enough Aboriginal history, well, and Australian history, actually. The point was made time and time again that not only do Australians not know Aboriginal history, but they don't know their own Australian history. And that comes up a lot in the polls and the research around how Australians feel the way in which history is taught to them. But what our people said was, there are examples of truth-telling or this storytelling of Australia that happens all over this country, led by First Nations peoples at a kind of grassroots level, at a community, local level. And people talked about things like commemorations of massacres, recognition and local recognition of massacre sites or significant sites. Lots of examples where the descendants of people who did do wrong have wanted to make amends with the families of the Aboriginal people who were killed or massacred during the period of the Frontier War. So many examples of the way in which local historical societies, local libraries, local councils, who seem to be quite heavy lifters in this space, local schools, work alongside First Nations peoples in the work that they do to tell the truth of Australia. That's the things that they wanted captured, or that's what they thought was really important, and that the role of a Makarrata Commission would be that when each group feels like they want to share a story, they would send that up to the Commission. They would choose when our stories would be told, as opposed to the experience of so many in relation to, say, the massacre mapping that goes on, where a lot of communities felt they weren't properly consulted, and that some of them don't want their stories featured in that database. And some felt quite ill at the thought that people on their lunch break might be scrolling through the Guardian's website and stumble upon, you know, a massacre map and be able to put their mouse on a particular town and see what the central massacres were around the site that they grew up or where they live. And they felt like no one had spoken to them about that or how they would feel about that. So there was a very strong sense of control and self-determination from groups, which is not something you get from a Truth Commission. So I think that's a really important point to make, because it not just speaks to the way in which our people have been leading this work, but to the way in which Australians are working with mob on the ground doing that work. And that's a really important story as well, the story of coexistence and coming together and telling those stories together. That's a really important story that we don't want to be lost if all of truth-telling is just about these grand commissions and the reports that come out. So I think that's a really important thing to start or mention when we talk about truth-telling. The next point, I think, is when Gabrielle Appleby and I, through the process of the dialogue, thought it was really important to have a database like this. And that is because it's important for Australians to understand that it's not a situation where people didn't know, that it was super messy, and everybody has read Henry's book, Why Weren't We Told? Well, the nation was told. The nation knew. You don't have to read those books or Stanner's speech to go, oh, there's this great silence and we know nothing about it. Actually, there's gazillions of reports in colonial records in terms of colonial parliaments in every jurisdiction in this country, and then post-federation of the nation having, and newspapers, of the nation having a very robust discussion about Aboriginal policy, from the massacres and killing times to the creation of the so-called protection era, to that integration phase and assimilation phase. It was openly discussed. You know, we've got records of newspapers where editorials in the 1800s were debating, you know, if they're Australian citizens or if they're citizens of the colony or they're British citizens, then probably it's a crime. But if they're not and they're aliens, then maybe the laws of war apply. And these are all open editorial discussions about massacres, about the killing of Aboriginal people. So we were told. And so a big part of this exercise was, and is, to collate that material to show, actually, this is the story of the Australian nation, the subjugation of these people, the massacre of these people, the dispossession of their lands. Dispossession doesn't just happen and nobody knows about it. There's laws and policies that we've and will continue to capture to show the story of Australia. And so that's what this story does. It seeks, or that's what this database does, but it seeks to capture in minute detail, what are those policies? Let me click on that policy. Let me have a look at it. What are those laws? Let me have a look at those laws and craft that really important story of what the rule of law meant in Australia, what the rule of law means in Australia. That's the conversation we have to have, because we have that conversation too often in the absence of a big story, which is the way in which the law has subjugated and oppressed a people. But it does also capture the ways in which the law can redeem. And that's something that was taught to many of us through Professor Garth Nettheim, who mentored decades of law students at UNSW on Indigenous peoples and the law. So I'll end my comments there, and there's so many people in the room to acknowledge. I can see so many friends, and in particular the researchers who have led this piece of really complex work, but just wanted to really acknowledge, Jonathon, your leadership and your tolerance of my many unanswered emails, which I think the whole world knows about, and my many absences through the project, and a lot of my text messages in the middle of the night from somewhere overseas or somewhere far flung. So thank you, Jonathon. And we're really, really proud of what this project has begun, or sorry, what this project presents, because I think it's actually a pioneering database. It's the first of its kind in Australia. It's actually the kind of thing that should be done forensically before those places that are determined to do truth-telling should do, because it provides a really forensic picture of the way in which much of what has happened in this nation was very deliberate. It was on purpose. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I get the great pleasure and privilege to showcase you all the website this afternoon. I feel particularly excited to be doing this. It has been a few years coming and working in Excel spreadsheets. So to see this thing actually come together, it's incredibly special, and it means so much. So I'm going to start by just bringing up the little website. Here we go. So what you're seeing right now is our homepage. There's a little bit about us, the incredible Indigenous Law Centre, and of course, our many amazing partners. There's essentially two ways to interact with Though. One is by browsing by theme, The other is by using a search tool, which I find particularly helpful. I only have 5 minutes to do this, so please just keep in mind what I'm going to share up on the screen. It's not so much about reading through the specific material. It's just to give you a sense of the website, what we're trying to map out, what we are mapping out, and how to navigate it. For those that are in the room, we also have a number of laptop stations set up. So if you hear something that sounds particularly interesting in terms of the subject matter, please engage with one of our amazing researchers and they'll be able to show you the ins and outs. Those who are joining us online, we're also going to send through the URL link to the website so you can have a click around. I'm going to start by browsing the website by theme. So each bit of research and information that we have published falls under one of these 4 themes: king, country, law and culture, and people. I'm just going to briefly go back to the presentation to give you a sense of what we've completed so far and what we still need to complete. So the boxes that are shaded in darker are what we have mapped out so far. You can see within kingship, we've made significant progress around laws and policies that have driven and continue to drive child removals in New South Wales. In country, you can see that we've published and completed research into water, including water appropriation and Aboriginal water rights. There's still quite a bit of work to be done within country. So things like land management, hunting and fishing, housing, Aboriginal land rights, those are all going to be coming quite soon. Within law and culture, we've completed research in languages, including the suppression of Aboriginal languages in New South Wales, and more recent laws and policies that are seeking to revitalise Aboriginal languages. And then in people, we have completed citizenship. That includes participation in democracy and participation in court. We have quite a bit of work to do within people. At the moment, we're focusing on forced labour, stolen wages, and the criminal system and enforcement. So to give you a sense, though, of how big the website is, at this stage, we've completed and catalogued over 750 laws and policies that have impacted Aboriginal people. We've catalogued over 3,700 supporting documents in 60 subjects over 4 research areas. I'm going to go back to the website now. I'm going to demonstrate how a user can interact with specific subject matter. In this case, within our people theme, I'm going to demonstrate a subject called Aboriginal people's right to vote in New South Wales. So the pictures that you see on the left-hand side, those are what we call our issues. The boxes next to those subjects, I'm going to click on Aboriginal people's right to vote in New South Wales. So the first thing that people are brought to within a specific subject is what we call our subject overview. We summarise all the laws and policies in a particular time period on a specific subject in 1,000 words or less. This particular subject focuses on laws and policies from 1823 to the present day. And essentially, Aboriginal people were denied the right to vote in New South Wales on a number of specific reasons for that under the law and policy. So we map out those impacts in 1,000 words or less. If someone's particularly interested in one of the documents that we mention, we make that available to them. Not only do we make it available to them, we also summarise why that specific law or policy is relevant to the subject and how it had an impact on Aboriginal people. For those who are like me, who are particularly keen and want to get into all of the details, that's available to you as well. Simply scroll to the bottom of the page and we show you all of the laws and policies that inform the subject overview and the subject. This particular subject, you can see, has 16 law and policy documents. It has 19 parliamentary debates. And time again, it never ceases to amaze me the amount of times that laws have been passed and continue to be passed, and yet have a significant impact on Aboriginal people, and yet we were not consulted. We're not even mentioned in the second reading speeches in Parliament. Discussion and analysis materials. this adds a bit of a extra layer of nuance. They're largely journal articles or comments by academics, and they explain specifically how a law or policy, although on its face may not seem, would have an impact on Aboriginal people and communities, in practice it did. That's the benefit of discussion analysis materials. Lastly, we have case studies. They're about the specific impact on an Aboriginal person or a community. We're not going out there and sourcing these case studies ourselves. They're already publicly accessible. So that's how to browse the website by theme. The second way, as I mentioned, is through a specific search. So if someone was particularly keen in, say, voting, we will bring up all the documents on the website. This has gone live today. This is the risk when you do it 1 hour ago. When you search the document, when you use the document search function, we'll bring up all the documents on the website that are relevant to the specific search term, and also the subjects that the documents are relevant to. I know the voting, I know it brings up 19 documents and at least 5 subjects. That's really what I wanted to show you all. It's just those 2 ways of interacting with the website. Certainly being on the team and part of the project has had a very, very profound impact on myself. I'm obviously very, very passionate about this stuff, and I know it's going to be so important in the sense of law reform. But I've just been so surprised on how significant the content has had an impact on myself and my community. And I know it's going to have such a powerful impact for many others. Thank you. I hand back to Jonathon.
Thanks, Megan and Corey, for sharing those perspectives. And as I've mentioned before, we're inviting Kishaya Delaney to join us as part of this panel discussion. And Kishaya, can I start with you? As a lawyer working on this project, you needed to be analytical and forensic and dispassionate, but I've heard you speak a number of times about how you engaged with the subject matter on a personal level. Can you tell us something about that?
Yeah, so when I first joined the Towards Truth project, I knew that it would be impactful on me just by nature of the content, but I hadn't really appreciated how much it would, given the fact that the database isn't intended for us to learn about their experience. But when you have an opportunity to contextualize your family history in the law and policy, it really does make a big difference. And I found, me personally, my great-grandmother had been removed as a child, and the documents that we had from the Aboriginal Welfare Board said, where it said reason for removal, it was just left blank. So we didn't have any information about why she had been removed. But after working on the project and mapping the child removal policies and law at the time, I was able to see, because of the age she was and the location she was in and the legislation that had passed the year before, she had been removed during a period of time where it was just because she was Aboriginal. And I knew because of her age that it was likely she went into an institution before she went into domestic service apprenticeship, which is a form of child slavery. And had I not worked on that project, I wouldn't have been able to piece that together. And I think being able to go back and tell my family and talk to my broader family about that, I think has helped us understand a bit more about our identity, because when you come from a family where Aboriginal identity has been suppressed by force of law and policy, you can understand why people identify in the way that they do and the way that my great-grandmother identified in the way that she did.
And Corey, can I ask you next, in your work on this project, have you learnt things about our history that have surprised you?
Yes, I've about our shared history. So I worked a lot on our participation in democracy, participation in court, and our languages subjects. And I think it's probably quite a common thing amongst black fellows. You kind of grow up and you hear about these terrible things that have, sorry, as I was saying, you always grow up and you hear about these things. I think probably the greatest truth that I've learned about a history working on the project is that realization that these things were done through the legal institutions. These things still aren't happening extra legally outside the bounds of the law. it's the legal institutions that are driving it. So that's been particularly eye-opening for me. And I think what the project's doing in this very unique sense is that we're showing the architecture of colonization over time.
Thanks, Corey. I think there's a tendency sometimes for us to imagine that it's the discrimination and oppression was the sort of result of individual bad actors or individual ill will, when actually it was a whole institutional apparatus. Megan, can I turn to you? You've written extensively, including with Professor Gabrielle Appleby, about the promise of truth. Can you tell us more about how you see towards truth fulfilling that promise, and I guess your reflections on it on a personal level, what that promise of truth means for you?
I can see Andrea Dobak in the audience, who you were in the office next to me, weren't you, at UNSW Law? And we've spoken about this for 22 years since we both were at UNSW, about truth and truth commissions, because of course I was always intrigued by South Africa and the experience there. And I've spoken for so long, I've forgotten your question.
That's all right.
Sorry.
What the promise of truth means for you, and I guess what your personal reflections on this work are.
I mean, truth is truth is a subjective thing in many ways. And it was never really truth that I thought about. Australian history I thought about, and the way it is told, and the way that narrative is shaped, and what as a lot of the old people in our dialogue said, what primary school students are told and what secondary students are told about who we are as a nation, and what has happened. I think in some ways the language took over post Uluru, because that's how people, I guess, found it easier to shape it. But I blame transitional justice academics, but we won't go there. But I mean, for me, it's pretty much the same as you said, every blackfellow. We've all got stories, and we were at Musgrave Park when we were in primary or high school, when they first allowed you just to fill out a little form to the archives in Queensland, and they would mail out your family history. And it's really shocking to see it. I mean, sometimes I hand mine out in class to show students, and they're really shocked in Indigenous peoples in the law. But when you see it as a kid or a young adult, it's really shocking to see the letters that your grandfather wrote, effectively grown men who are, so my grandfather on the railway begging for money, access to your salary, because of course the state took all of your salary, begging to purchase a hurricane lamp or a blanket, an extra blanket, or wanting to go to or I remember there's this one letter where he inherited not a horse, but a buggy that is attached to a horse, like this olden days, obviously. And just everything was a no, except for the times they did let you go to ceremony and things like that. But it's a really defining moment of growing up, knowing who you are and what happened to your people. And so, I mean, this project's really important because our mob can go on and see a lot of the laws and policies that actually shaped what their community looks like today, what all of our communities look like, and the stories of people past, but also our elders. And Australians can, because I don't think we see it in this way. I think there's particular narratives that we choose as communities about Australia. And obviously the one that frustrates me the most is the one where everybody shrugs their shoulder and says, oh, well, we didn't know, or, the great Australians, and all these tropes we roll out, and then we can just go back to doing whatever it was that we were doing. But it was real and it was tactile. And there were, people will often say, well, that happened in another generation, it's not our responsibility. Well, sure, but It was still Australia. And so that's education is power for all whether it's our mob or Australians, and that's what this database provides. And it is the first of its kind in that it paints that picture. And the researchers here in Bridge have worked really hard on that. The work that you guys have done, it's really the deep minutiae of, as you said, colonisation. And it's been a remarkable emotional journey, right? We've been talking about this since 2017, 2018. It's been a project for a long time, and it's taken that long to do New South Wales, which is why we need more money to do the other states.
I'll get to that.
Sorry, I'm jumping in.
No. But I mean, I remember in early conversations with people when they would say, "What are you working on?" And I'd say, "We're mapping laws that have impacted on Aboriginal people." And they would say, people would say, "From when?" I was like, "From 1788." And they go, "Which laws?" I'm like, "All of them." And there was something audacious. I knew as I say that I was like, "Oh, actually, I hope we can pull this off," because it is. But it's that granularity and that ability to look across in areas like language or in voting or in and there are things that we kind of think that we know, but constantly, Corey or Kishaya or someone from the team would come out with something, and your jaw just hits the desk, and you think, "Wow!" And it's a combination of the times that Aboriginal people are apparently simply absent from the discussion, and then there are the times at which they're absolutely front and centre, and there's no mistaking what's going on. Kishaya, can I come back to you? You spoke recently at a Reconciliation Week event about how the project is evidence of the need for a voice. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, I think when I was working on the project, I was struck by the amount of law and policy that was written with the absolute absence of First Nations people. But there are also so many laws that were passed, and during the parliamentary debate, members of parliament say, has anyone consulted the First Nation community? Has anyone considered the impact that this is going to have on Aboriginal communities? And it was always, well, not always, but often sort of cast aside as an afterthought. And I think that shows that the parliament knows that the system as it stands doesn't work. And I really think that having a mechanism like a voice so that First Nations people can be in the room at all stages, from the development of the policy through to the application of the law and the implementation through the government, I think is just so important. And I feel like when you look at the Towards Truth database, it does really seem like documentary evidence of why we need a voice. And so while we go through this conversation in the lead up to the referendum, I know a lot of people are asking the question of what type of things will the voice advise on, what type of matters might they want to give advice. And I think looking at the Towards Truth website, you can really get a sense of situations in our past where, had we had a voice, I think it really would have gone a different way.
I think people will be interested to note that the RBA and interest rates and submarines don't appear on the database. We haven't gone there. Thanks, Kishaya. Megan, I want to touch on an idea that I know you've drawn on in connection with the call for the voice, and that is Jill Stauffer's concept of ethical loneliness. Can you tell us a bit about ethical loneliness, and do you think Towards Truth also responds to that challenge that that issue the voice also responds to?
Yeah, can I just say Kishaya very eloquently answered that question, because I think this database is exactly a watershed moment in terms of being able to convey to Australians why the voice is needed. We know most Australians have never met an Aboriginal person. We know that part of that is why they're struggling to understand, well, put disinformation and misinformation to one side. They are struggling to understand what happens in our space because they don't know. They don't know communities. They haven't met Aboriginal people. And the media does a substandard job. If I remember watching in the Morrison era, the media just running press releases from PMO, word for word. That's the quality. There's no forensic analysis or reporting of what goes on in communities. We have a crisis in Yarrabah where there's copper in the water. There's poisoned water in so many communities across this continent, and it is not an issue to anyone. People will go and, this is showing my age, people go watch Erin Brockovich and worry about water poisoning in other parts of the world. But in Yarrabah, they can't get the state government to help them. The local government is now saying the mayor's been called gallant for trying to help, gallant for helping someone with poisoned water. And so the feds, locals and the state, just no one will respond, you know, and so this database is a really important, I think, tool for that, because it will make an enormous difference, as you say, to have Aboriginal perspectives feeding into this work of democratic decision making, because currently our politicians are just flying blind. They're absolutely flying blind, and then wonder why money's not hitting the ground. So on ethical loneliness, it's a really interesting concept. It was like 2015, and the two major sides of politics had decided that, oh, you know, maybe this stuff's too hard. Maybe we'll just decide on symbolism. So everyone had rejected symbolism really in the expert panel process. Australians had said, we don't want constitutional recognition if it's just tokenistic and not going to make a difference, right? So on a recognition spectrum, that is acknowledgement. It sits at the weak end of the spectrum. It doesn't require the state to do anything. It doesn't compel them to do anything. It doesn't empower Aboriginal people. And so this was just prior to Abbott committing to the Kirribilli meeting, it was actually after the Kirribilli meeting when I'm sitting in the room and I'm looking at him and Shorten going, and 40 leaders around the room talking about why substantive recognition was important and that we wanted another process. I remember thinking, what is it like for a Prime Minister to sit in a room like this and hear from 40 really substantial communities about how profoundly dissatisfied they are with the way in which Australian democracy listens to them and responds to them. And there are a lot of unhappy people in that room. And we know that unhappiness feeds ill health and well-being and other measures in our communities. And so I found this book, Ethical Loneliness, because I was trying to look at, I've never been a theorist, as Andy knows. Like when I had to do my PhD and I did it at ANU and they said, you must choose a theory. And I'm like, I don't want to choose a theory. I want to do something practical. Sorry for the theorists in the room. And so that's how I used Nussbaum's capabilities approach and tried to do something practical that might, you know, make a difference on the ground. And I was trying to find theory about what it's like for communities for people to live their whole life and like no one ever listened to what you're saying, like no one. And look, it was voluminous, right? The literature, there's a lot written on that. But I found this woman who'd studied a lot of the transcripts of former interns of concentration camps during World War II. And she'd written about this concept of ethical loneliness, which means that there's a thing that humans do when the people who are meant to protect you and the systems that are meant to protect you just abandon you. And you're in the most extreme kind of situation and humanity has just abandoned you. And it's not the same example as that, because that was a story about how people into themselves and had to remove themselves from the situation because it was too heinous for any human to cope with that. But she writes about communities who just isolate themselves and withdraw themselves or remove themselves from the societies in which they live and the communities in which they live to protect themselves, because and they say it's an ethical decision that people make when humanity lets you down time and time again. And, you know, I see the kind of dominant discourse, for whatever reasons, mostly misinformation and disinformation, that's going on around The Voice. And I just think, when these people use the language of elites and Canberra Voice and Canberra, they have no idea what our people have been through, or many are still going through, and why The Voice is so exigent to their situation and their lives, and no awareness of the manifestation of some of these laws and policies upon our people today. And that's what that story is about. And she says that kind of ethical loneliness, that kind of failing to listen and hear to what people want, it haunts the sites of reconciliation and things like exercises like that. It's why reconciliation will not work without the nation listening to what it is that our people say repair looks like. And that was what that Uluru exercise was. You know, we are confident through all of our work with communities that the stats from last year to this year that are routinely sit between 83 and 88% of our people will support this. They do. There is a loud 10% that don't, including people who have a voice, a privileged voice, including parliamentary privilege and sit in the parliament. But the majority of our people support this. Of course they do. And so she talks about the importance of societies listening to what those communities say is repair. What does repair look like to them? And they've spoken about the fact that these three things, voice, treaty, and history, truth, they are actually separate, but all needed. So the voice facilitates something very different to anything else. Sorry, I just did that. Because it's about our people, that's the kind of really complex but boring to most people work of the bureaucracy and the government in our space is not easy for people to understand, but they dominate and subjugate our people today in communities. It's very hard to convey that unless you have to experience the humiliation of having to manage bureaucrats, you know, ministers and their advisors who all know better in our space, but they're not talking to people in communities. And so it's really important for us as a nation to hear what it is that people are saying repair looks like, for us to be even able to contemplate whatever it is that reconciliation is. That's a really convoluted answer. It's went all over the place there.
We got there in the end. Thanks, Megan. That's fantastic. Corey, just finally from you, with many lawyers in the room, what role do you think the legal profession has in truth-telling?
Well, besides continuing to support this amazing project, I think just engage with the material. Some of it is truly shocking, but it's unbelievably important. Obviously, there's many people here who are far more brilliant than me and would know a lot of this stuff already, but please continue to talk about it, have these conversations. And as I mentioned before, for me, when I made that really important link between the fact that these things are being driven by legal institutions, and when I'm looking at these documents and I see just an absence of consideration for First Nations people, I can't help but think what we could be as a legal institution, as a nation, if we actually started to fill in those gaps, to consider Aboriginal people, listen, really listen. And in this very beautiful way, and Kishaya and Professor Davis has already touched on it, to me, the power towards truth is that you're just making it incontrovertible how important law reform, and specifically a voice to Parliament, is. How important it is.
Before we finish this formal program, I need to make a number of very important thank yous. This has been an extraordinarily collective effort. Can I first thank the project director, Anna Harding. Where's Anna? Oh, hello, Anna. Thank you. And the PIAC Towards Truth team, Corey Smith, Sally Treverton, Brent Wood, Oliver Williams, Krista Gerard, and Errol Gorer. I also want to acknowledge Jason O'Neill, Noah Bedford, Charisma Camillo, and Kishaya Delaney for their contributions to the project, particularly in its pilot phase. And I can't tell you how important it's been for us at PIAC to have such incredibly smart, humane and passionate First Nations lawyers working on this project. What they've brought to it intellectually has been absolutely instrumental and an enormous pleasure for all of us at PIAC to share. I want to give special thanks to Daniela Gavshon, who I think is hopefully joining us online. She can't be here. She was the original director of Towards Truth at PIAC, and she was really critical in the genesis and development of this project in its early years. To Megan and the team at the ILC for trusting PIAC to partner with you on this incredibly important work. Thank you, Bridget Karma, to David Lee, and also earlier in the project, Eddie Sinnott, Emma Maple-Brown, Darnie Larkin, and Gabrielle Appleby. I want to thank you, say a big thank you to everyone who's supported this work financially. We've had 21 organisations, families and individuals who've generously donated to make this project possible. You've backed us to bring this ambitious and, as I say, audacious idea to reality. You've recognised that it takes time and patience, and we're really, truly grateful for your support. I'd like to also thank our pro bono partners, HSF, Clayton Utes, Lander and Rogers, Norton Rose Fulbright, Macquarie, and most recently Origin Energy, and the talented lawyers at each of those places that have made it possible to identify, analyse and catalogue in that painstaking detail you've seen over 4,500 laws, policies and supporting documents. I also want to thank PwC Indigenous Consulting for their support with the website design and user testing, which was a wonderful pro bono contribution. We've had 15 subject matter experts who've given us their time and expertise to navigate the depths of these topics and the laws that we've researched, and we're enormously grateful to those experts who are listed on the website. I'd like to especially thank HSF today for hosting us, and also to Bree, Hilary and Dan at PIAC for all the work that goes into organising and promoting an event like this. So now we invite you to explore the Towards Truth website. It's towardstruth.org.au, or you can just search Towards Truth. And you'll see in it that we've achieved a lot, but there's still a great deal to do. We think about another 2 years' work to complete New South Wales and in how we're currently tracking. And we're then looking to spend some time to consider both other jurisdictions, mapping the laws and practices, for example, of the Commonwealth Government, which we're really keen to take on, but also how we can amplify the impact of this work by supporting community to engage with this powerful resource. And this still is a very document and text heavy resource, but one that we're really fascinated and excited to see how the Australian community can engage with this in different and creative ways that are beyond our ken as humble lawyers. Now, to get all this done, we do need your ongoing support. If you're already supporting Towards Truth, thank you. We love you. We'll be in touch over the next week to talk about how you can stay involved. If you want to become a supporter, please come and talk to me or to Anna Harding or to Hilary Blackman, who are here, or get in touch with us via the contact page on the Towards Truth website. And I just want to end by recognising that Towards Truth shows us not only the official records of colonisation and dispossession, it is also a story of resilience and of resistance. It highlights the long history of Aboriginal people fighting for and driving reform to laws and policies that can protect and empower. And you'll see in it the development of the Aboriginal Child Placement Principle, calls for Aboriginal water allocations and Aboriginal involvement in water planning and management, the revitalisation of languages and Aboriginal land rights. It reminds us yet again that First Nations people have the solutions to the challenges their communities face if we can but listen. Thank you all for being here, and I invite you to enjoy Towards Truth.
In the spirit of reconciliation, Herbert Smith Freehills acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to their elders past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people today.